Okay, yeah, bye. Hello, everyone. Can you see me? Let me know if you can see me. Okay, can you hear me? Let me know if you can hear me. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel helped me. This is the first time I've done a scheduled live stream. I've always just gone live. So every time you do one of these new, if you're an old dog, you have to learn some new tricks. So that's kind of what happened there. So welcome, everyone. I apologize for the lateness, but we're here. So that's what matters. And what I wanted to talk to everyone about today is the upcoming showdown at Thompson Rivers University. Now, I used to call Rivers University the worst university in Canada. That was before University of Winnipeg. And I think it's going to be hard to surpass the University of Winnipeg. But for people who want some background on Thompson Rivers University, I first had a set to with them in 2015. So this is going on quite a long time. For people who are unaware about Thompson Rivers University, it is in Kamloops. It is extremely indigenized. So it takes pride in being indigenized. And they have something called the Coyote Project, where they've decided to indigenize all of their departments, and they're doing it very aggressively. But I think before that started to happen, Albert Howard and I were invited to come and give a presentation on the Aboriginal industry by a former student of mine. And I was quite surprised when my former student invited me, because I knew that Thompson Rivers University was the heartland of the Aboriginal industry. And for people who don't know what the Aboriginal industry is, it is the lawyers and consultants who foment grievances so that they can siphon money away from marginalized Aboriginal communities. And Dallas Brody and 1BC, they have a documentary coming out at the end of this month called The Reconciliation Industry. And the reconciliation industry is sort of an extension of the Aboriginal industry. So it's about supposedly reconciling, which is, open up your wallet and, shovel out some money to neo-tribal elites and the lawyers and consultants that are behind them. And this will allow everyone to get along better. But of course, it actually makes things worse because the grievances are intended to keep on going forever. So in 2015, Albert Howard and I arrived there at Thompson Rivers University. Bradford Morse was the dean of the law school, and he is a lawyer who works for the Aboriginal industry. So we thought we were going to be in for a rough ride. We gave our presentation. Everything went really well. Everyone was very open to discussing with us aspects of the Aboriginal industry. This was a student law conference. And I was amazed. 2015, I was saying to Albert, wow, things are changing. This is going to be the shift that's going to happen now. We're going to be able to discuss the kinds of things that we want to talk about. So I went back that night with Albert to Calgary. The next day, I was having a drink with one of my friends, and I got a phone call from Albert who said that the CBC wanted to interview him about racism that had happened at this law school conference. And I thought, what on earth is happening? Anyway, there was this horrible interview with CBC where the CBC set up. Albert was trying to feed questions to students there about whether racism happened. And it was a huge meltdown that occurred. And this was an omen of things that were going to happen in the university. So this was, I believe, March 2015, February 2015. And things have become worse and worse and worse until we are here we are now. And we're going back into Thompson Rivers University now because on May 27th, Samuel Harrigot, who is the videographer who did What Remains. So if people haven't watched What Remains yet, you should watch that documentary. It gives an overview of how the Kamloops, the false claim about the remains of 215 children being found, that false claim, how that was used to tear apart the town of Powell River. And that's what the Aboriginal industry does. If you're wondering why there's all these conflicts, it's because a legal system has been set up whereby you have an unworkable situation, whereby now we have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which got put in through stealth, where it's assumed that Aboriginal peoples are nations with a right to self-determination, and Aboriginal groups are not nations. They are tribal groupings that are organized on the principle of kinship, which is blood and marriage, and they do not sit easily within a geographical system, which is how Canada is organized on. Canada is organized according to geographical. You got British Columbia, you've got Canada, you have all sorts of people living within these geographical boundaries, and you can move from one province to another, and then you enter into that province of another geographical area. And it doesn't matter what your background is. That's not how Aboriginal politics operates. It is based upon the principle of ancestry. And so now you're having situations like Pender Harbor, where people who live in an area have no control politically over what happens to them because the Aboriginal group, of which they have no lines of accountability to, are making all sorts of determinations. So this is a sneak preview of what is to come. So that is a huge problem in British Columbia. And Thompson Rivers University is, ground zero, because they are the heartland of the Aboriginal industry in their law school. They have been involved in all sorts of legal disputes, which with lawyers that work for that entity are doing. The most obvious of these people is Nicole Shabbos, who was married to Arthur Manuel, who is a major Indigenous activist, and she's been involved in land claims and so on. And she thinks that people who deny that the residential schools are genocidal should be put in jail. That's her view. Anyway, we went into Thompson Rivers University on May 27th. Simon, myself, and Kathy Drake, who was a former student at Mount Royal University, had to leave Mount Royal University because of the terrible activism that was going on there. And anyway, we went in there on May 27th, the 4th year anniversary, to do a Spectrum Street epistemology session. And we were met by Steve Pottle, who is the head of safety. That's his role. He said that we were on the first house of the Kamloops, which is the Aboriginal group, and that we would have to leave. And we said, we're not going anywhere. We're staying here to defend the academic mission of the university. And all your administrators have been involved for the last several years in fomenting this false claim about the Kamloops unmarked graves, this supposed unmarked graves. And this occurred in September 2021, 2 months after we knew, as Sarah Bollier said, the GPR operator, that it was not remains that were confirmed, it was targets of interest, 200. We had an exhibit by Johnny Bandura, who's an artist who did this exhibit called the 215, about paintings of all the supposed children that were buried and how they would, they failed to realize their potential. So Thompson Rivers had this exhibit on their stairs. This was in September 2021. And then we had 2023 and 2024, we had Ted Goverson Jr., who's an activist with the Kamloops Band, talking about the children being in their final resting place in the apple orchard with Brett Fairbairn, who was the president of TRU. And then finally in 2024, we had Dee DeRose, who's the chancellor, talking with Ted Govridson Jr. about the children that had been, the bodies that had been found in the apple orchard at Thompson Rivers. So this university is an embarrassment, a complete embarrassment. It is actively perpetuating the false claim. It's not operating according to academic principles, and therefore it should be of no surprise that on October 15th, I was sent a trespass notice by Thompson Rivers University, which told me that I would need to get authorization. Oh, I'd caused all this harm to the people at Thompson Rivers, and I would need to get authorization from them to, come onto their campus. Well, that is not going to happen, Thompson Rivers University. So I'm going to be going in with Simon, who's going to be the videographer. We've got Dallas Brody from 1BC. We've got Jim McMurtry, who as well was fired from his job in Abbotsford for saying that children were not murdered at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and Will Dove, who is a journalist from Calgary. And we're hoping to get other people to go into Thompson Rivers University. Juno News, which is involved in the documentary that we are, the sequel that we're going to be doing to What Remains. Simon and I are currently working on a documentary on the Kamloops case. It's incredible, the kinds of footage that we have, what we're putting together right now. Anyway, this is associated with Juno News. They're going to be there as well. And we'd like to get faculty members, if you're concerned about the nature of your university, which you definitely should be if you're an academic and are concerned about, having activism completely take over that entity. And don't forget your colleague, Derek Pine, horrendous things happening to him, where he had harassment complaints filed against him for trying to expose predatory journals, publishing in predatory journals. And we have an interview with Derek Pine on my YouTube channel. So this university, we need to get this university back on track in terms of being an actual place where you can discuss things. And so that's why we're going to be going in to Thompson Rivers University. And what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a sandwich board. I typically would like to do Spectrum Street epistemology there, but it just is too chaotic. If people watch the University of Winnipeg, what happened there, my mats got stolen. I guess all sorts of things were happening. So that's too chaotic to be doing that. So what I have is a sandwich board that I have the word remains in question mark with a picture of the 215 Every Child Matters kind of logo. So the question is, are there remains of children at the Kamloops Indian Residential School? What do students and faculty members and the public think about that? Do people think that that's the case? And if they do, what's the evidence that they have for that? And what would require them to become less certain or more certain? So to do a slight Spectrum Street epistemology approach, but use the sandwich board or the billboard as a way of doing that. So that's one kind of question. The second question is denial. What about this word denial and denialism? And on this board, there's a picture of Dallas Brody, who is standing in front of a sign put up by the Penticton Indian Band, which has Every Child Matters, and it has hands and feet and 215. So it's basically saying that there's 215 children who are buried in the Kamloops apple orchard, and every child matters, and we should be concerned about this because every child matters. Anyway, Brody is standing in front of this sign holding another sign which says 0 bodies, which is completely true. So, do people get upset about the fact that the Penticton Indian Band has this false claim that's on the highway, this huge billboard? Or do they get upset at Dallas Brody for drawing attention to the fact that this is false information that is being disseminated by the Penticton Indian Band? So, and we even have people like John Kay, which I was very, very surprised to see. You know, Jonathan Kay has been one of the people who has been sounding the alarm about the false claim. He's upset at Dallas Brody because he says that this was insensitive. I'm sorry, John Kay. The time for sensitivity has long passed. We have now had 4.5 years of manipulation, because that's what it is that you have these neo-tribal elites in the Aboriginal industry. They are sort of relying on compassion, the compassion that people understandably feel for the marginalized members of the Aboriginal population, to stoke these grievances, which the false claim about the children in clandestine burials, that's what that was designed to do. And this was, and we don't know how deliberate this was. This is an open question. But the Kamloops Indian Band, many of them, this is not the ordinary members, but this is the leadership. People like Manny Jules, for example, who is, a relatively astute Aboriginal leader. There's other ones who you don't know what they're thinking. Someone like Ted Godfreyson, like he seems to not have any understanding of the difference between anomalies or remains. And I don't know, it's just if it's just confirmation bias or what's happening there. But Manny Jules, in all likelihood, knows better than what he's doing, but he understands what the implications are going to be if he comes out and says, okay, we got to do the excavations now. So $12.1 million. This is something that Simon and I are currently working on in terms of the freedom of information request that we have. It's shown that this was given to the band. About 3.2 of that that $12.1 million was used for excavations, specifically for excavations. And so they have the money to do it. They haven't done it. And what does the government do about that? They are allocated another $12.5 million to construct a healing center to help members of the Aboriginal Kamloops Indian Band deal with the grieving process that they've had to go through after hearing about this claim that the remains of 215 children have been found. Like, I've got something to propose instead. Instead of having the healing center and spending $12.5 million on that, why don't we do the excavations so that we can reassure members of the Kamloops Indian Band that it's, in all likelihood, it's septic tiles that are there in the apple orchard and not the remains of children, because not one parent has said that their child never came home from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. There's not one missing child that's been reported. Now, people like Aaron Pete, who I have great respect for, he says that that's because the parents were all afraid to go to the RCMP because, of the history and the fact the RCMP didn't listen to them. This is, I don't think is, and with all due respect to Aaron Pete, I don't think that that's a valid kind of analysis. First of all, we have lots of records of parents complaining about all sorts of things over the last 60 years, 70, 80 years, the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So they're complaining about various things like the quality of food that their children are getting and so on. So why wouldn't they then complain or raise the alarm about children who had gone missing? As well, there was a task force in the 1990s which investigated claims about suspicious deaths, and not one person during that time mentioned anything to do with missing children, unmarked graves. And they had hired Charlene Bello, who is a very well-known activist now in the movie Sugar Cane, and she was actually at the meeting in Quesnel when there was that big meltdown, when I was just trying to ask questions about the accuracy of this press release that the council was reading into the record. She was there at that. So she's just everywhere. Anyway, she was hired to help people to come forward about any concerns that they might have had. So that doesn't make any sense as to how that could have happened in the 1990s, and there was no whisper of any unmarked graves or missing children and so on. Okay. So this raises the question of why is there this huge battle that's happening over the Kamloops case? And it's my view that Kamloops is the card in the house of cards. And once we start pulling on the Kamloops card, that whole foundation that the Aboriginal industry has built up over the last 50 years is going to start to become more unstable. And the Aboriginal industry does not want that. And they are going to fight really, really hard. And if I'm to predict what's happening right now, all those activists and the Aboriginal industry people that are at Thompson Rivers University, they're going to be putting serious pressure on the administration at Thompson Rivers University. So we're going to see what's going to happen. And they say that, I'm going to be declared a nuisance and they will pursue me to the fullest extent of the law. You do that, Thompson Rivers University. Pursue me. That is my stance, and I will not back down from this. I am very confident about my understanding of the Kamloops case, and we need to have a reckoning right now, November 12th. That's when we're going to have a reckoning. We cannot wait another 6 months, another year, another 10 years, whatever it is that the Kamloops Indian Band wants to, to spin out. Sorry, we spent 4.5 years dithering around. They said it was Ted Gottfriedson, Manny Jules, and Dina Jules said in around September, October 2022, or I guess that was 2021. No, they said in 2021 that they had decided, the 13 family heads had decided to do what they call the exhumations because they wanted to bring the children home to their communities. Well, this is jumping the gun on this, because in order to have exhumations and to bring the children home, you need to have actual graves there, and it hasn't been established that there are graves there. It is highly improbable that there are graves there, and there are not 215 graves anyway. There would be 200 graves if there were the number, because the archaeology department at Simon Fraser has already excavated part of that septic tile area, and they found that there were no remains, and that led Sarah Beaulier to downgrade her 215 targets of interest to 200 targets of interest. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense. And if we were thinking rationally about this, we wouldn't be where we are. But what's happening is there's this encouragement to believe whatever it is that an Aboriginal activist is saying, and their Aboriginal industry associates are backing that up with all sorts of threats. Residential school denialism being hate speech, and now they want to criminalize that. So, and you can imagine what it's like to be a professor at Thompson Rivers University or a student, is that you're not going to get any support from the administration, and the union is absolutely atrocious. Like, unions are really bad in Canada, as I know from my own case, and I know from the case of the University of Winnipeg, where they accused me of spreading lies and that I was engaged in denialism and that my view should be quote unquote combated, which then resulted in a whole bunch of gangsters showing up in combat fatigues. But Thompson Rivers University's faculty association doesn't even compare. It's so terrible as what happened to Derek Pine. So no professor is going to want to stick their neck out, and the students take their lead from the professors. And so we've got to come in there and restore some kind of semblance of critical thinking and open inquiry at that university. And that's what we're going to do on November 12th, 1:00 p.m. at Student Street. And I'm going to have my billboard on me, and we can have discussions about those two questions, about the remains, whether remains are likely to exist at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and also about this denialism, this kind of idea of denial, like what is being denied. Dallas Brody has been accused of denialism for putting up that sign, zero bodies. Does quote unquote denying that there's remains at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, is this what they're talking about with respect to denial, or is it some other thing that they're talking about? Okay, so that's the plan. I'm hoping there's people in Kamloops who are going to be there. I'm hoping some professors are going to be there at Thompson Rivers. And what I want to raise the alarm about now, because I have a Facebook page, which I have been posting numerous things on the Facebook page, and I noticed that there is a tendency for racism to break out, actual racism, and that's not racism like I disagree with a knowledge keeper. Like that's we have Vivian Ketchum and Geraldine Shingus, and if you disagree with their truth, you're a hate monger, you're disrespectful, you're a racist, so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are making comments about Aboriginal people and saying that they've got these kinds of ancestral genetic characteristics which make it so that they should have discriminatory treatment be meted out against them. And that's not where we want to go in the future. We have all sorts of problems that are based upon Aboriginal people having special rights, or what would be called privileges, in our system. And this is a mistake that we made in Canada starting, in the late 60s. Alan Cairns it was the Hawthorne Report, called it Citizens Plus, that Aboriginal people should have the same rights as everyone else, and then they should have a plus. That's a recipe for disaster happening. Now that's not to kind of deny that there aren't serious problems that marginalized members of the Aboriginal population have that need to be addressed, largely due to what is called uneven development. So if you have people that are part of a hunting and gathering and horticultural culture, they have features. Those features are less developed than those in modern nation states. And that's not talking about Aaron Pete or Negon Sinclair or anyone else who's completely integrated into society. It's talking about the marginalized members of Aboriginal communities who have trouble working by the clock, have trouble interacting with people who are not related to them, and who have trouble developing abstract forms of reasoning, which comes with written cultures, scientific processes, and so on. That's not racial, in my view. It's cultural, and what you need is some kind of strategy to try to bridge that gap between the hunting and gathering horticultural period and modern society. Now, the residential schools were trying to do that a little bit. That's what their whole purpose was to some extent. Now, that was kind of it had a lot of problems with it, and one of them was that it was the religious authorities that took over the whole educational enterprise. And I'm not a fan of religious education. I don't think that's education at all. I think it's indoctrination. And so you don't want to be telling children that they should fear burning in hell and all these kinds of things and whatever. You want to be very sensitive about this situation where you have people who perhaps don't understand what it's like to live in a modern nation state where you don't treat people in the public sphere politically differently if they're not related to you. Like, this is a huge problem in Aboriginal communities. And I'm just going to give a shout out to Jennifer Lambert. Jennifer Lambert is a Métis woman who was associated with the Kamloops Band, actually has 2 children that live in association with the Kamloops Indian Band, and she has just gone through absolute hell because she's Métis. She's not part of the Kamloops Indian Band, yet because her children are part of the Kamloops Indian Band, she can't get any recourse from a higher authority. It's all due to the band and how the band is going to control everything that happens with her children. And that's the problem with Aboriginal politics, is when we live in a geographical area, we need to have authorities that are higher than the tribal groupings so that we can all feed into one system that treats us equally under the law. And that's not possible within Aboriginal politics, because Aboriginal politics is based upon the tribal principle and not the principle of geography. And so I really hope that something can be done for people like Jennifer, who is completely at sea and is actually in hiding because she can't get any satisfaction from any of the authorities, because all the political power has been devolved to these tribal the tribal leadership. And we've got to face up to this. We're facing up to a number of things going on. We've been in denial, for lack of a better word, about how Aboriginal politics in its current form is incompatible with the politics of a modern nation state. And I don't know what to be done about that, but the first step in trying to solve a problem is recognizing the problem. And so we got two huge problems with respect to the Aboriginal population and the marginalized conditions. This is not about integrated Aboriginal people who just have Aboriginal ancestry. You wouldn't even know that they were Aboriginal if you just met them. But they get the sort of the privileged kind of status, and they get access to things that you don't get if you're not Aboriginal. But the two problems are the Aboriginal industry, which has become a monster, a huge monster that needs to be defunded. I don't know how many billions are going into the Aboriginal enterprise, but it's billions, and that's all funding the legal disputes. So if you want to starve the legal disputes and let's just move, let's just hit the restart button so we can figure out how to solve all the problems. We need to defund the Aboriginal industry. The second is the uneven and combined development problem, which needs to be addressed seriously, and even more so these marginal Aboriginal communities that have no economic base. What's to be done about them? And that doesn't mean that they should just be, eliminated. We're dealing with serious social problems in these communities, but what is the plan to address the unviability of these communities? It's not just going to be like, let's spend more money to those communities and let them sort out their problems, because they have no idea how to to solve their problems. So, it's not like these are easy answers, but the Aboriginal, the way of just funneling money into the Aboriginal industry, that just makes these conditions worse. It does not address the conditions. So I think this is a good backdrop so what I see is Thompson Rivers University, what's going to be happening on November 12th. This is a reckoning of trying to grapple with the huge problems that are facing Canada generally, and the Aboriginal population. The first thing we need to have is honest conversations about this. And the honest conversations typically would be happening in universities, because that's where you have people who are protected in terms of their jobs to be able to be speaking honestly about this. But because universities have been taken over by equity, diversity, and inclusion ideology, which is, I want to say, I know people often call this some kind of far left communistic kind of ideology, but I don't agree with that. Now, we can have an open discussion about that, but this is the ideology of late capitalism, which is not focusing, is diverting us from any kind of understanding of class politics, which is about labor, You are actually producing value with your labor, and is diverting it into things like affirming that Aboriginal people are victims of genocide. So you got to do that. And if you don't, you'll be put in jail. Or the trans activism, you've got to say there's more than two sexes. You've got to say that people can be born in the wrong body, children can be born in the wrong body, and this requires that they have their penis inverted and have an arm flesh appendage sewn onto their groin to be a mock penis. Like, this is where we're at here, and this is crazy. So you cannot, if you're born female, you cannot become a man, and if you're born male, you cannot become a woman. But this quote unquote far left ideology is saying that you must affirm that, and if you don't, you're going to be hauled before some human rights tribunal, and then you're going to be maybe put in jail now, and so on. So, like, let's stop all the nonsense. This doesn't make any sense. Now, there's certainly conversations to be had about whether capitalism is the best system or not. Those are much more rational discussions. And in terms of my own political views, I'm a socialist of the Orwellian variety. So for people who don't know about the writings of George Orwell, you might want to check out 1984 and Animal Farm and all his great classics, Homage to Catalonia, where George Orwell went and fought the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. So George Orwell took issue with a lot of aspects of imperialism and capitalism and so on, but he was very well aware that socialist movements could go into the direction of the Soviet Union and so on, and we don't want to have that. If socialism is going to result in that, we don't want socialism. So, but it's an open question. But we can't talk about that now because everything's been taken over by equity, diversity, and inclusion ideology, which the banks really love, and China really loves. China is not a communist country. China is a capitalist country, which has a lot of state control, which in the 1930s, that was called fascism, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll just bookmark all those left-wing, right-wing kinds of discussions and get back to the unmarked graves claim at Kamloops. We must have truth about Kamloops. If we can't have truth about Kamloops, we cannot have truth about anything, because it's very clear that this claim is highly unlikely to be true. And if that's the case, why are all these people so eager to have people say that it is true? That's the kind of question that we need to look at, and we're going to be looking at that on November 12th, 2025. It's time to have some truth about the Kamloops case. And I understand Aaron Pete and all his concerns about nuance. I did invite Aaron to come to Kamloops, but he's very busy, and as well he's nervous about the optics of it, because it could provoke lots of emotions and so on. He's wanting to have very sort of calm and sedate conversations. But my own view is that we need to have a diversity of tactics here. Is we can have the calm conversations, the nuanced conversations, but that's only going to get us so far. And Thompson Rivers University has to be held to account, and that you're not going to do that through some kind of nuanced conversation. You have to go in there and force the issue. And that's what Will Dove, myself, Jim McMurtry, Simon Harrigot, Dallas Brody, we're all going to be doing that. And we want to be calm and not have confrontations. But Thompson Rivers University, we're not going to back down from this. So what you need to do is you need to put out some notices to your students and your faculty and so on, and say, We've made a mistake in terms of our past actions. We've spread a bunch of misinformation. We shouldn't have done that. And now we want to restore our university to an academic environment. And so that means that, students who want to get all upset, you can protest and so on. But we don't want to have the same kind of meltdown that we had at the University of Winnipeg, because no one wants to be like the University of Winnipeg. That university is lost. It's completely lost. And although Thompson Rivers is not far behind, it hasn't yet descended into that level of chaos and absurdity. Anyway, I'm just looking. Sorry, I haven't been able to look at the chat. Maybe someone can put something. If you want to put, I'm now looking at it. So if you want to, if you said something which you think I need to address, I can do it. I can do it now. I'll have to. I should do it cut and paste here, because I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose the chat, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to have it. Okay, I've just now cut and pasted it, so I'll put it in one of my documents. I'm just cutting and pasting the chat, so I can take a look at it at some other date and see what people had to say. But if you want to put something in to the chat now, I can look at it. The Mia Hughes convo at Laurier. So that was interesting. So Brady Simpson, who's a great guy, we've done street epistemology at Mount Royal University. I thought, Morgan. First of all, I was glad that it happened, and although I find Morgan Auger to be a very difficult person, I've got to give credit to him. It's a man, despite him claiming that he's an adult human female, he fathered 2 children. That's what he did. So he's a man. He's probably an autogynephile, so he gets turned on by thinking of himself as a woman, and therefore has to have his penis inverted. That makes that makes the illusion more real to him. But when everyone looks at him, they just think, oh wow, that's not going to work. In terms, if you're trying to pass as a woman, that's not going to happen. Anyway, so I have to take my hat off to him that he participated, because the last time an event like that happened was in 2019 at Mount Royal University with Julie Ray Goldstein and Megan Murphy. So that's the first thing. So it happened. Hopefully this means that, the silencing and everything that's happened is going to continue. But I didn't think that it was a very high level of discourse. I don't think that Morgan Auger really responded very well to things that Mia was saying, and it must have been really, really frustrating for someone like Mia Hughes, who is a very, very accomplished journalist who's been, studying this area for years in a very in-depth way, is author of the magnificent WPATH files, that she would have to kind of sit through that kind of frustrating situation. But still, it's better. Rome's not built in a day. And it was really, really good to see. And because they've got a pretty strong group of professors there, Jeff Horseman, Will McNally, and there's another person there, I forget his name at this time. They're quite strong in terms of their organization. So I think they'll be able to withstand the kind of backlash. And there doesn't seem to have been much so far. In my case, when I organized that event with Megan Murphy and Julie Ray Goldstein, there was a terrible poisoning that happened of my environment, which was facilitated by the Dean of Arts, Jennifer Pettit. The humanities department there with D.A. Dirks, who's a trans activist, and there was a students association, Nathan Lawley, who's a trans activist. Everyone was really upset by that event, and things kind of just spiraled downward, starting with that event. And so that ended my career at Mount Royal. Well, hopefully it hasn't ended it, because I'm going to the labor board in December for reinstatement. So that's the battle. And if the Alberta government is listening to this, I must be reinstated at Mount Royal University. If I'm not reinstated at Mount Royal University after everything that's happened, universities are over in Alberta. So this is a huge case. It should never have happened. It was due to massive incompetence by the administration and their facilitation of, equity, diversity, and inclusion ideology. So hopefully that was good. Any other questions people have? I'm looking at the chat. Anyway, so people in Kamloops, time to show up. Time to show up at 1:00 p.m. Student Street. We're going to discuss the question of remains, and the question of denialism or denial. The Oilers or the Rangers? Good question. And the Blue Jays, like what's going to happen with the Blue Jays? This is the Canadian obsession right now, which, it's good to have some sports that we think about, because sports they're fun, and you can get too serious with all the horrors that are going on. It's nice to just go have some beers in the pub and talk to your friends about something that is not intellectual. It's more, sports are an important part of our culture too. Until the EDI. EDI in sports. How's that going to go? Well, I guess there's the trans stuff. Like there's, the men all competing in the women's sports. But, the basketball, I'm looking forward to the basketball where you've got to have a, equal representation of height. You have to have you have to make sure that representation is done according to height in basketball. Anyway, I hope everyone's enjoyed this. Sorry that it was so late, but I'll know better next time. If you're going to be in Kamloops, please join us and get ready for whatever's going to go down there, because I will not back down from trying to get the truth about the Kamloops, the claim that there are children buried in the apple orchard. Have a great day.